the bus door closed with a hollow thud, sealing me inside with the stale air of plastic seats and nervous breathing. Through the glass, I could still see my parents waving, smiling too brightly, as if this were an opportunity instead of an exile. Their figures shrank with every turn of the wheels until only the outline of the camp road stretched ahead, lined with pines that seemed too tall, too silent. They called it a chance for a new me, a summer of discipline, exercise, and transformation. But what it felt like was punishment, as if the body I carried was an offense they could ship away, leaving me to strangers who promised correction. The other kids sat in clumps, whispering in clusters of recognition. Some stared out the windows, faces blank, arms folded tight across their chests. None of us wanted to be here, though few said it. The shame of it clung heavier than any luggage, thicker than the humid air that seeped through the bus vents. When the gates loomed into view, iron bars etched with cheerful lettering, the cheer felt grotesque. Camp Renewal, the sign declared, painted in colors that were already peeling. Renewal, as if we were broken objects sent here for repair. The cabins squatted in rows beyond the gate, their wood darkened by years of weather. The counselors greeted us with wide smiles, but their eyes carried calculation, scanning us like merchandise to be sorted. They spoke in voices too sweet, words rehearsed. "Welcome, you're safe here. This is the summer that changes everything." I wanted to believe them, but the pit in my stomach deepened. The first night, the routine began. Early wake-up times, strict meal portions, exercise blocks marked by whistles and chants. Every movement scheduled, every hour claimed. They said it was structure, but it felt like erasure, stripping away not just weight, but will. The beds were thin, the cabins drafty. At night, whispers carried through the wood, kids crying into their pillows, muffling sobs so counselors wouldn't hear. Some whispered about running away, but the woods stretched thick and endless, the fence too high. I tried to count the days, scratching faint marks into the frame of my bed, but time blurred. Each dawn identical, each meal tasteless. Even laughter felt rehearsed, forced during mandatory team-building games. We were strangers, bound by the same sentence, sharing a punishment dressed as salvation. Yet what unsettled me most wasn't the routine. It was the silence after lights out. The woods pressed against the cabins, too quiet, as if holding its breath. Sometimes I thought I heard movement outside, slow steps circling, branches snapping with deliberate weight. Once I caught sight of shadows stretching too far across the window, long after the counselors had gone to bed. One night, I woke to a sound like humming. Not a tune, not a voice, but a vibration, low and steady, seeping through the floorboards. It pulsed through the mattress into my bones. I held still, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was pipes or wind. But the air carried a faint scent of earth, damp and metallic, as if something beneath the cabin was breathing. The next morning, the counselors pushed us harder. They said discipline required discomfort, that change came through struggle. Their eyes watched too closely, noting every hesitation, every weakness. And when one boy collapsed from exhaustion, they carried him away without explanation. He didn't return that evening. They told us he was resting in the infirmary, but the bed beside mine remained empty. I began noticing things others ignored. The counselors' smiles stretched too wide in the mornings, their eyes ringed with sleeplessness. Their voices were too synchronized, repeating phrases in unison, as though reading from a script. And sometimes, when I looked too long, I swore their faces shifted slightly, features misaligning before snapping back into place. Meals grew stranger too. The portions shrank, the food blander. Once, I lifted my spoon and noticed faint symbols etched into the underside of the bowl. Circles intersecting, lines crossing. When I showed another camper, he shook his head, saying he saw nothing. But later that night, I found the same symbols scratched faintly into the cabin wall above my bed. Sleep offered no escape. Dreams carried me into the woods, where shadows gathered in circles, humming that same low vibration. In the dreams, I stood among them, my body thinner, my reflection fading. When I woke, sweat drenched my sheets, but my skin carried the scent of damp earth, as if the dream had followed me back. By the second week,
I no longer recognize myself, not because of weight loss, but because my reflection felt delayed, as though the mirror wasn't keeping up. My voice sounded flat, unfamiliar. My body obeyed commands I didn't fully choose, running when told, eating when instructed, sleeping when ordered. Autonomy slipped away like sand through fingers. And yet, beneath the fear, a darker truth grew clearer. This camp wasn't about health. It was about replacement, about shaping us into something else, hollowing us until only obedience remained. The counselors whispered promises of transformation, but in their eyes, I saw hunger. And in the silence of the woods, I felt the presence of something older, something waiting.
Each night, the humming grew louder. Each morning, another bed sat empty, and no one asked questions anymore. I kept counting my scratches on the bed frame, though I no longer knew if they marked days or just illusions of time. All I knew was that summer had become a sentence, and I wasn't sure who would walk out of this camp when it ended, if anyone at all. The days lengthened, but they no longer felt like days. They were blocks of command and silence, indistinguishable from one another, melting into one endless season. The counselors said the structure was good for us, that repetition built discipline, but discipline began to feel like disappearance. Each morning when the whistle blew, I felt less like a person and more like a shadow moving in unison with dozens of others. The boy who had collapsed still hadn't returned. His name lingered on my tongue, but when I tried to speak it aloud, it slipped from memory, leaving only emptiness. I searched the camp for him, but no one else seemed to remember. When I asked, faces went blank. Counselors smiled too widely, and the conversation drifted away. It was as if he had never existed. That was the first time I realized the camp wasn't only reshaping bodies, it was erasing names. The food grew stranger, portions shrank further, not just small, but symbolic, as if eating less was not about health, but about surrender. I found myself chewing on nothing, the blandness seeping into my thoughts. Hunger gnawed constantly, but it became more than physical. It felt spiritual, a hollowing that widened with each passing day. At night, the humming under the floorboards grew louder. I pressed my ear to the wood and felt vibrations crawl into my skull. Once, when I whispered to myself to stay awake, the vibration shifted, pulsing in rhythm with my words, echoing me. I recoiled, but the floor stayed alive, breathing beneath my mattress. Other kids began disappearing, beds empty, scratches on the bed frames halted mid-count. No explanations offered, no alarms raised. The counselors called it progress, said those who left had graduated early, but their belongings were gone too, drawers cleaned as if they'd never been there. And slowly the rest of us stopped asking. To question was to draw attention, and attention here was dangerous. One afternoon, during forced jogging, I noticed the woods again. The trees didn't just line the camp, they leaned inward, their trunks twisted as though bending to listen. Branches formed shapes too symmetrical to be natural, circles etched against the sky. And sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I saw faces among the bark. Not human faces, but impressions of mouths and eyes pressed outward, as if the trees had swallowed something alive. The counselors noticed when I stared too long. One of them, tall, smiling, with a whistle always hanging from his neck, stepped beside me and whispered, almost kindly, "Focus forward." His breath was cold against my ear, colder than the breeze, and for the rest of the run, I felt his gaze on the back of my neck. That night, I dreamed again of the circle in the woods. Dozens of kids stood hand in hand, their faces blank, bodies swaying to the hum. At the center, the counselors moved like shadows, their arms stretching too far, fingers bending like roots. They whispered words that dug into me, words I couldn't repeat when I woke. When I opened my eyes, my body was damp with soil, dirt smeared across my sheets, clinging beneath my fingernails as if the dream had pulled me halfway into the ground. The scratches on my bed frame became my only anchor. Each mark was a defiance, a statement that I still existed, that I was still counting. But one morning, I woke to find the marks smoothed away, the wood polished as though untouched, my rebellion erased in silence. It wasn't just objects vanishing, it was memory. I tried to recall my parents' faces, the last glimpse of them at the bus stop, but their features blurred, slipping away like water. I pressed my temples, begging myself to remember, but all I could hold on to was the too bright wave, the outline of shapes shrinking behind glass. Their eyes, their mouths, gone. One evening, while walking back from the dining hall, I felt something shift in the air. The path was lined with torches, their flames steady, but shadows stretched wrong, bending towards us instead of away. My reflection in the windows of the hall moved a fraction too late, as though something else was watching through my skin. That night, a counselor entered our cabin after lights out. He carried a notebook, pages thick with symbols. He walked between the bunks, touching the foreheads of sleeping kids, murmuring low words. When he reached mine, I kept my breathing even, pretending to sleep. His fingers brushed my skin, cold and damp, leaving behind the faint scent of earth. He lingered, as if testing whether I belonged. My heart hammered, but I stayed still. After a long pause, he moved on. In the morning, another bed was empty. The camp grew quieter as our numbers dwindled. Meals served to fewer. Chants echoed thinner. Yet the counselors smiled wider, their voices sharper with cheer. They told us we were improving, that we were transforming. But transformation felt like subtraction. Every day I lost something. Memory, hunger, even the sound of my own voice. One afternoon, I stumbled upon the infirmary. The door was ajar, though it was always locked. Inside, the air was heavy with disinfectant, masking the metallic tang of soil. Beds lined the walls, but they weren't empty. Shapes lay under sheets, bodies too still, too thin, their chests rising in mechanical rhythm. Beside each bed sat bowls filled with dirt, symbols etched into the rims. By mid-July, the camp felt half empty. Whole rows of bunks stood bare, sheets folded tight, names unspoken. Yet no one asked questions anymore. The silence was heavier than curiosity. It was easier to follow the rhythm than to notice the voids. Easier to pretend nothing was missing. But I noticed. I couldn't stop noticing. My scratches on the bed frame were gone, erased again, but I still counted in my head, whispering numbers against the hum that grew louder each night. My numbers kept me tethered, but even they began to slip. Sometimes I'd wake unsure if I had counted at all, or if the whispers had spoken the numbers for me. The counselors grew more watchful. Their smiles stretched impossibly wide at mealtimes, their chants louder during exercises. They praised our progress, though their eyes held calculation. I began to feel singled out, their gazes lingering when they called for volunteers. I learned to shrink into the crowd, to keep my steps steady, to never falter. To falter was to vanish. One evening, the whistle blew later than usual, summoning us to the field. The torches burned higher than before, smoke spiraling into the dark. We gathered in rows, but the numbers didn't add up. Far fewer of us remained. The counselors moved among us, whispering encouragement, though their words curled strangely, twisting into syllables I couldn't understand. Then they led us toward the woods. The trees loomed close, branches arched like ribs, shadows layered upon shadows. The air vibrated with that familiar hum, louder now, impossible to ignore. My stomach churned, and yet my feet obeyed. We walked deeper until the trees parted, revealing a clearing I'd only seen in dreams. The circle. I stepped closer to one bed and froze. The face beneath the sheet was familiar. A boy who had vanished weeks earlier, eyes open but blank, lips moving silently. The hum filled the room, vibrating from their throats, synchronized and endless. Before I could scream, a shadow fell across the door. A counselor stood there, smile sharp, eyes hollow. He didn't scold or shout. He simply raised a finger to his lips, a gesture of silence, and I ran before he could move. That night, the dream returned with more force. I stood in the circle again, soil heavy on my skin, my body thinner, my voice gone. The counselors whispered, their words curling around me like vines. And at the center of the circle, a pit opened, darkness breathing. It called not with sound, but with hunger, a pull deeper than gravity. I woke gasping, nails clawing my sheets. Dirt clung to my fingertips again, and on the wall above my bed, faint but visible,
A new set of symbols had appeared, scratched into the wood as if by invisible hands. I couldn't deny it anymore. The camp wasn't meant to heal, it was meant to hollow. And every night, I felt myself slipping closer to whatever waited in the woods.
When I opened my eyes, the clearing was empty. No children. No counselors. Only me, sprawled in the dirt, chest heaving. The pit was gone, replaced by bare soil, though the air still carried the faint metallic tang. I stumbled back to camp, but the cabins stood abandoned. Beds stripped, dining hall empty, torches extinguished. It was as if the camp had never existed. Only my scratches remained, reappearing on my bed frame. Deeper now, carved as if by unseen hands. At dawn, I walked to the road. The gates of Camp Renewal loomed, open wide. No bus waited, only silence. I stepped through, leaving the camp behind, though the hum lingered in my bones. Now, weeks later, I sit in my room at home, but nothing feels real. My parents ask how camp was, their faces blurred in my memory. I try to answer, but words fail. At night, I hear whispers beneath the floor, faint but growing. And sometimes in the mirror, my reflection blinks a moment too late. I don't know if I escaped, or if I only carried the camp inside me. All I know is this: the summer never ended.
Symbols carved into the earth glowed faintly, pulsing with the rhythm of the hum. The counselors took positions around us, forming a perimeter. Their eyes shone in the torchlight, too reflective, too bright. At the center of the clearing yawned a pit, wide and black, its edges damp with soil that seemed to breathe. We were told to form a ring, hands clasped mine, cold and trembling. The counselors began to chant, voices weaving with the hum until the air itself shook. My chest tightened, the rhythm sinking into my heartbeat, forcing it into sync. I tried to pull away, but my body refused. My muscles belonged to the circle now. The pit pulsed, shadows writhed within it, shapes half-formed, faces pressing upward as though trying to emerge. For a moment, I thought I recognized them. The missing campers, their features blurred, eyes hollow, their mouths moved, whispering in unison, "Sever ties." The earth shifted beneath us. One by one, kids were pulled forward, their bodies moving without struggle. They stepped into the pit, swallowed by darkness. No screams, no resistance, just silence as they disappeared. And each time one vanished, the counselors' smiles widened, their whispers thickening. When my turn came, the hands holding me tightened. My feet dragged toward the center, soil damp beneath me. The pit exhaled, the air cold and metallic, filling my lungs. Faces flickered in the dark below. Children I had known, erased now, waiting for me to join them. But something inside me resisted. The memory of my parents waving at the bus stop, blurred as it had become, flared for an instant. The faint image of their faces, the warmth of belonging, even if imperfect. I dug my heels into the soil, pulling against the force. The hum faltered for a heartbeat. The counselor nearest me snapped his head in my direction. His smile collapsed, revealing something jagged beneath. He stepped forward, eyes glowing, and pressed his hand against my chest. My body stiffened, lungs locking. The pit's pulse surged, threatening to tear me apart. In desperation, I dropped to the ground, clawing at the soil. My fingers scraped symbols carved into the earth, breaking their lines. The glow sputtered, the rhythm staggering. A scream tore through the clearing, not from me but from the pit itself, a sound of rage and hunger. The circle broke, kids stumbled back, counselors shrieked in voices not their own. Shadows writhed wildly, twisting into the trees. I crawled, gasping, tearing at the soil until my nails bled. Each broken line weakened the hum, fractured the rhythm. The ground trembled, the pit convulsed, collapsing inward. And then, silence.